Okie dokie. We are hearing to this series we're doing right now is good lessons from bad guys. And we're going to talk about a guy that, I've heard this story before. I've read Samuel, and I remember as a kid we did that Bible Bowl multiple times. So I know I've heard this story, but I kind of had to get completely re-familiarized with it. So, talking about a guy named Doeg, I think is how you say it. D-O-E-G. Doeg, the opportunist. So, let's y'all turn to 1 Samuel. Chapter 21. No, yeah, chapter 21. All right, time for the glasses. All right. 1 Samuel 21. Roger.
Yes, sir.
I love hearing your voice.
The entire chapter?
No, just the first 9 verses.
That was last
21, 1 through 9. I'll read the.
Toby stopped in the middle, like, you want me to keep going? First 9 verses, okay.
Oh, hey, let me set the stage because
Okay.
it helps to set the stage. We've got David and Jonathan. They became pals. Jonathan was King Saul's son. They had just made their pact of friendship where they agreed that they were going to trust each other. Because Jonathan was very aware that his father, King Saul, was very jealous of David and the success that he had because in this story, he had just, not talked too long before that, he beat Goliath. And really, he was a popular guy. And, and ironically, he was Saul's son-in-law. He married Michal, Saul's oldest daughter. And, Jonathan, as Saul's son, could be his rival more so than Saul even. Because David, with all that popularity, you could see how there could be an uprising and a support for his possible kingship, and Jonathan was the one that should have been the king, following the lineage. But anyway, that in the context of that happening, Saul was starting to have a whole lot of jealousy towards David, and there was a lot of problems there. So then we come to chapter 21, and David, well, we're going to hear about it. So now know that that's what happened just right before that. So Roger, if you'll do the reading.
Okay, 1 Samuel chapter 21, verses 1 through 9.
Right.
David went to Nob to Ahimelech the priest. Ahimelech trembled when he met him and asked, "Why are you alone? Why is no one with you?" David answered Ahimelech the priest, "The king charged me with a certain matter and said to me, 'No one is to know anything about your mission and your instructions. As for my men, I've told them to meet me at a certain place. Now then, what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread, or whatever you can find.' But the priest answered David, 'I don't have any ordinary bread on hand. However, there is some consecrated bread here, provided the men have kept themselves from women.' David replied, 'Indeed, women have been kept from us as usual whenever I set out. The men's things are holy, even on missions that are not holy. How much more so today?' So the priest gave him the consecrated bread, since there was no bread there except the bread of the presence that had been removed from the Lord and replaced by hot bread on the day it was taken away. Now one of Saul's servants was there that day, detained before the Lord. He was Doeg the Edomite, Saul's head shepherd. David asked Ahimelech, 'Don't you have a spear or a sword here?' I haven't brought my sword or any other weapon, because the king's business was urgent." The priest replied, "The sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, is here. It is wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you want it, take it. There is no sword here but that one." David said, "There is none like it. Give it to me."
Okay. So David shows up in Nob. I had to look up where Nob was just to put this in context. Nob was only a mile outside of Jerusalem. It wasn't very far out. It was up on a hill. Just not too long before that, there was an Assyrian king named Sennacherib, and he had attacked Jerusalem, and that's what the temple, of course, hadn't been built yet. They were still working with the tabernacle and all that. Anyway, they raided the tabernacle or whatever, and all of the priests relocated up to this city or town called Nob. So it's just like going from Lubbock to Wolf. It's not a big remote place away, but that's where they went. That's where all the priests were, and they were all hanging out up there. So we have David. He went up there. He asked for something to eat. The only thing they had was the holy bread that they had put. There was always a loaf of bread set in the tabernacle right outside the Holy of Holies, if I'm right on my geography. And it always sat out there, and it was always there as a sacrifice. And priest said, "That's all I've got." And David said, "I'll take it." So he ate it. And then I think it's interesting, they say that they went and cooked, that they replaced that bread with hot bread that very day. I mean, they took it, those priests took it that serious that bread needed to be there, that they went and baked bread and went through all that process to do it right then and there. So that's a little side lesson. I don't understand. I do not have a clue why David showed up and he didn't have a weapon with him. If he was a fighting man, if he was a leader, he was the head of Saul's, guard. I don't know why he didn't show up prepared, if he was a man of war. But he got there, he didn't have anything. And he asked a priest of all people, you have any weapons laying around? I'd like that. I need to go prepared. It's like you need to go somewhere on a mission. But I cannot imagine that Goliath's sword did him a whole lot of good. Because, Goliath was 9 feet tall. They talked about his spear. The spear that Goliath carried, the tip of it, the head of that spear weighed 15 pounds. So I can't imagine that his sword was anything that David could be real effective with. But we also know in this part of the story, there's this guy named Doeg that was hanging around, and he'd been praying at the temple and worshiping, not the temple. So anyway, wherever that up in Nob, he was doing that. But he became aware. He knew that Saul had a problem with David, and he wanted to be aware of what David's whereabouts were. So he knew that, and he made a mental note of that. Then we're going to move on to the next chapter. Amber, how's your reading skills?
That's what Russians do.
Go to chapter 22, read 6 through 19.
Okay. Now Saul heard that David and his men had been discovered, and Saul was seated, spear in hand, under the tamarisk tree on the hill of Gibeah, with all his officials standing aside. He said to them, "Listen, men of Benjamin, will the son of Jesse give all your fields and vineyards? Will he make all of you commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds? Is that why all of you have conspired against me? No one tells me when my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse. None of you is concerned about me or tells me that my son has incited my servant to lie and wait for me as he does today."
Okay. What's an observation from what we just read? What's curious about that? Any thoughts?
He's not calling David by his name.
That's exactly what I was thinking. He is so intimidated by David, he cannot even speak the dude's name. He has to refer to him as the son of Jesse. I think that's good. That you're king, and you can have such an inferiority complex that you can't call a guy by his name. That's always kind of amazing when people do that. Okay, carry on.
But Doeg the Edomite, who was standing with Saul's official, said, "I saw the son of Jesse come to Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub at Nob. And Ahimelech inquired of the Lord for him. He also gave him provisions and the sword of Goliath the Philistine. Then the king sent for the priest Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, and the men of his family, who were the priests at Nob, and they all came to the king. Saul said, "Listen now, son of Ahitub." "Yes, my lord," he answered. Saul said to him, "Why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, giving him bread and a sword and inquiring of God for him, so that he has rebelled against me and lies in wait for me, as he does today?" Ahimelech answered the king, "Who of all your servants is as loyal as David, the king's son-in-law, captain of your bodyguard, and the highly respected in your household? Was that the day the first time I inquired of God for him? Of course not. Let not the king's accuser servants or any of his father's family, for your servant knows nothing at all about this whole affair." But the king said, "You will surely die, Ahimelech, you and your whole family." Then the king ordered the guards at his side, turn and kill the priests of the Lord, because they had too sided with David. They knew he was fleeing, yet they did not tell me. But the king's officials were unwilling to raise a hand to strike the priests of the Lord. The king then ordered Doeg, "You turn and strike down the priests." So Doeg the Edomite turned and struck them down. That day he killed 85 men who wore the linen ephod. He also put the sword to Nob, the town of the priests, with its men and women and children and infants, and its cattle, donkey, and sheep.
Yeah, I read the next verse just because.
Okay. But one son of Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled to join David.
So let's unpack this for a second. We got Doeg. You've got a king that's so paranoid he can't speak his enemy's name, or his supposed enemy. Enemy, yeah. That's right. I was busy rebelling. All right. And then we've got this Doeg guy. He's a brown noser. That's just all it comes down to. I mean, he just sat there. All he is a shepherd. How he ended up in the king's advisory council, because that's basically who he was talking to right here. I just think that's kind of funny. But he's the one that showed up and said, "Hey, Saul, I know where David is." And, gave him the whole skinny on what was going on. And Saul's reaction was, "Let's go, let's get him. Let's get this guy here. I want to know why he helped David." Well, is it unusual for a priest at that point in time to be doing priestly things? Not really. Why, David, that was their system back then. David would go to where the priests were and offer sacrifices and do the things that he would do. Treat it like a drive-through, I guess, and go get some bread while he was at it. But they, Doeg could have, I think everybody around Saul knew that Saul was starting to develop some problems. And it seems like when Saul, when he reached this conclusion that Ahimelech had done these bad things, I mean, what sane person decides you did something wrong and I'm going to take you out and your whole family out now? And just instantly, I mean, that's the sign of an unbalanced guy, which we knew Saul was. But who showed some pretty good judgment in this process? Yeah. I mean, think of it. You're sitting there getting a direct order from the king. And those guys said, "No, we're not going to do that." I mean, they recognized that there was something bad going down here and we can't do it. I mean, I would think they probably made that decision knowing that, considering the mental state of the guy that they're taking orders from right now, that could have bad consequences. But anyway, he did.
I wonder, when Ahimelech is answering Saul, he refers to David as captain of your bodyguard. I wonder if the guards that he asked to kill him were under David's.
Pretty much, and I think that I'm sure there were, as far as the hierarchy goes in the army, I'm sure that's probably right. There probably is a correlation there somewhere. you know, again, when they didn't do it, who jumped up to take the opportunity? Oh, Doeg. He was there to, the shepherd was there to go. All right. So then again, visualize this. You got this one guy, you got all these other people around. Hello, Connie. Talking about assassination. So we're in 1 Samuel chapter 21. 22 now. So we've got this Doeg guy, one single guy, he goes around killing and cutting throats of 85 people. Right then and there. I mean, just imagine how crazy that is. And at some point, you would have thought after, the 20 or 30th person that he killed, he ought to sit back for some self-reflection and think this is a little crazy. That I'm going around cutting all these people's throats right in front of and everybody sitting there watching. But, Doeg didn't do that. So, we see this story. What are some lessons, if there are some lessons to be had from this? What are some things that we can take away from this?
I'm kind of curious why he was detained before the Lord in the first place. Doesn't sound like he was that upstanding of a man.
Yeah.
He's being detained by the Lord or in the presence of the Lord.
I'll get that either. The right there at the end, it talks about this Abiathar was the one guy out of the whole group that ended up escaping. And he was the only one out of the whole priesthood, as it turns out, that didn't get killed. And we hear his name again later as David actually ended up becoming king. Abiathar was his high priest, was the high priest at the time, because as we know from the story, he was the only guy left. And he was the last of that lineage to be the priest in the priesthood. So that had to rebuild again under Abiathar. So the lesson, I think this is a little bit of a stretch, trying to find out. You'd think we could find more bad guys in the Bible to talk about other than have to talk about this guy. But there actually is some correlations here in the guy that wrote this lesson. He talked about the fact that, do we as Christians, do we come in contact with people that are opportunists, that take advantage of you and of your situation? And as you're nodding your head, you should tell us about it. How does that happen? Have you ever been around, what can you think of an actual example of somebody that did something against you because of who you were? Yeah, I'm looking at you.
Are you thinking of something specific right now?
No, but I thought you were, since you were nodding your head.
I don't know, not necessarily against me, but I've seen it against other people. I mean,
Those things happen.
at camp when I was a counselor, not necessarily towards me, but there was a girl who was very popular, she thought she was the queen bee of everything, and she saw the opportunity to kind of put her, I guess in her mind, raise her standing and take a jab at another girl. She was taking those opportunities. During Devos, when girls would talk about what they're struggling with, and the next day she'd take the opportunity to jab at them and be like, well, I know you're going through this, but I don't have to worry about it. And so it's not killing people, but she's still cutting other people down and taking the opportunities to try to elevate herself and I guess her mind.
Those wounds could be just as bad sometimes. Some background, I forgot this part. Doeg was an Edomite. Who's an Edomite? Descendant of Esau. So, okay, all right. We were all in early service today, so we can do this. Usually I'm not the one
We
that gets
usually
the
get
divorce.
that out of that conversation.
I'm usually the one that's lost and catching up there this one. So, you know, he was a descendant of Edomite. He's kind of like, nobody's in here redheaded, so I can say this. He was kind of treated like a redheaded stepchild all the time. You know, that's just always a phrase that you hear. You know, there's always a kid that's a little bit different and out, and gets treated bad just because they're different. Is that true in any way? Since you have a redheaded kid, I just realized.
I'm gonna give you a hard time with that.
There's always, you know, the approach was, did he, as an Edomite, did he have a chip on his shoulder, or did he kind of have a false superiority complex? Because it always seemed like they never, and this is true in other examples, the Edomites treated people differently. They were treated differently because their father Esau didn't treat his birthright correctly, just like Dale talked about in the sermon today. He gave up his birthright for a bowl of split pea soup. I mean, just imagine that. Dale talked about that in the sermon today. That still blows my mind that it was, you know, that somebody would be so petty as to do something like that, to think so poorly of such a great thing that he had, that he would kiss it off for a bowl of soup. What?
Yeah, you jumped on that. I mean, selfishness. I mean, he saw it, the king, he saw it as a way to advance himself, you know. It doesn't seem like it was necessarily obedience of the king, but I'm gonna take advantage of this opportunity to, you know, advance. I do have a question, since you called me on, I'm gonna make you answer something. In when David answered Ahimelech, because he said, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "The king sent me on a mission." How come King Saul didn't know where he was?
Because David was lying.
He was running from
He was right.
he was running from Saul. That was right after.
That's his mission from the king.
That his mission from the
Get away
king was
from
to
him.
get away from
Get
him.
Get away from him.
No, there was some deception going all the way around on this deal. I mean, David knew that he was a marked guy right now, and he was on the run.
I think it's funny also in 22, we didn't read this part, but, when the priest that escaped got to David, David said, "I knew when he was there that would get back to Saul." I mean, how many times have we thought, when something happened, I knew that was gonna be a problem to, you know.
Sometimes David did not exhibit the qualities of a deep thinker. He didn't sometimes. But in our lives, trying to apply this to how we live now, I mean, I think there's two ways to go this. We have an example given that we don't want to be that guy. We don't want to be that opportunist that, like the queen bee you were talking about, you don't want to be that person to take advantage of something that you become privy to and end up hurting somebody with that information. I mean, I think that's just a good rule for life. That's something you don't want to do. Because you don't want that to happen to you. You know, so you always put the shoe on the other foot and see how it feels. But, you know, I mean, I can think of examples in my life when I've had people take opportunities to take jabs at me, and it's hurt and it hasn't been good. You know, I think that's the lesson to bring out of this is just the fact that we want to be, as Christians, if we apply that to our Christian lives today, you have to kind of know how a bad guy thinks so that you know if you're dealing with a bad guy. And also you don't want to be that bad guy. So I think that's important. I think more than anything else, it's important to know how to act with each other. I mean, that's just part of being a good Christian and being a good human being. I'm dealing with a deal right now. I've got a boss that's 31 years old and is feeling his power a little bit too much. And that's something I'm really looking forward to dealing with tomorrow. Because he flexed a little bit hard right before New Year's Eve. And I'm gonna have to deal with him a little bit. And him and his boss and HR evidently and everybody else. So just kind of one of those deals, but I mean, so it's timely in this lesson in that regard. I've just kind of got to think about, you know, Allison knows I hit back pretty hard on New Year's Eve with his accusations towards me on how he wanted to correct me. And I've got to go back and kind of recheck myself and think, hey, he's got some authority here. I need to recognize that, and I need to, you know, treat him properly. So I'd like to treat him like the punk kid he is a little bit, but that's just something, you know, to keep in mind. So this is a good lesson for me today, in that regard.
Not necessarily about opportunism, but you know, the idea, the concept of family systems, and you know, things that are passed down generation after generation, those cycles that tend to come out through our families. Maybe we can make a connection there with Doeg, going back to Esau and the way Esau was treated. Esau being ungodly and immoral and selling off his birthright, but certainly afterwards feeling regret for that and wanting his status, wanting his recognition back. That's something that then is passed down generation after generation, and then we get to Doeg, who's doing the same thing. I have a footnote in my Bible that suggests that Psalm 52 is written from basically this idea or this concept of you know, Doeg looking to take advantage of the situation, but at the same time, you know, David in that psalm is saying, "Don't you realize that you're just going to finish in ruin?" And so I guess, and I haven't read through Psalm 52 to see what all is maybe alludes to this particular situation, and specifically Doeg and David going to Ahimelech. But just that idea that Doeg maybe is following in his father's great grandfather's, however many generations have passed, and knowing, yes, like last week we said, you know, as parents we can't take too much credit nor too much criticism for how our children turn out, but we do need to treat that with a great deal of honor and respect, that responsibility of raising our children and raising them well, because there can be those things that carry over generation after generation. I was talking with someone earlier just about the situation for some of the kids out of the boys' range. Kids have been removed from their parents because of neglect, parents involved in drugs, and those parents have been clean since July. And they got all the way to Thanksgiving, and just after Thanksgiving, they had a drug screen that pops up as positive. And you know, our question is, well, how does that end up happening? And of course, one of the answers we jump to pretty quickly is go home to family for Thanksgiving. And if that's something that family's always done, then you're just kind of pulled back into that in those situations. So perhaps that's what happened. You know, that's kind of speculation as to why that happened, but sometimes our family systems can have a very negative impact on our kids, but at the same time, our family systems can have a very positive impact as well.
That's true. That song you talked about, it was, yeah, that was a direct relation. I mean, I wanted to circle back to, yes, David would do some boneheaded things, but he always, never forget. I mean, one of the reasons why I like David so much is he did some really dumb things, but he always ended up remembering, and, he always said he had a heart after God, and he would reflect, and he was always smart enough to realize when he made a mistake, and he would reflect on it, and he'd write his Psalms. That's the way, he expressed himself in many ways. And he did talk about in that Psalm about, Doeg, I don't think he called him out, if I recall, I read that Psalm. It didn't call him out by name, but yeah, he said that you caused some bad things to happen. You killed an entire family. And he did talk about that, and like, you're gonna reap the consequences of that.
Yeah, he says, surely God will bring you down to everlasting ruin.
Yeah, it wasn't like you're just gonna get put on probation. So, the conclusion, as we got through this, is how do we, live our life? That's, to me, this is always about how do we apply it. And we talked about going to Philippians chapter 2. So I'm going to read that first few verses of Philippians 2, and this is a set of verses that's probably familiar to everybody. This is how you live a Christian life, and you can apply Christ's love and example to your life. It says, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any fellowship from the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and purpose. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Each of you should look not only to your own interest, but also to the interest of others. That's how we should treat other people. We should treat each other with respect and with humility. And that's exactly the example Jesus gave us. That's what he told us to do. That's what he showed us to do. And rather than be that opportunist to look for the quick and easy opportunity to get a good laugh, to get to do some personal gain, do the hard things. Because more than anything else, as Christians, we're told to be encouragers. And how do we encourage? We reflect Christ, and we show people his love. So to me, that's the story of Doeg, and that's the lesson that we can take out of that. Is it's always better to be an encourager than a terror downer.
I think
Technical term.
I don't think being opportunistic necessarily is inherently bad, but whenever the background comes from selfish desires and you're doing it to better yourself and put yourself forward, then that's when things get a little tricky and a little rough.
You're right.
But like, if we use that opportunistic desire that we have to serve and be like Christ, like David, I would say was opportunistic in some ways, like always wanting to serve. He did some stupid things, like you said, but we can take that as Christians and kind of be the opposite to like just look for opportunities to serve.
Absolutely.
Your way to help. So,
Yeah, you're right, and I'm sorry. I always kick myself after I'm done talking. I forget I left out the main point. Yeah, he was taking opportunity to do bad things. You can obviously take opportunities to do good things. I should have said that. You're right. You pointed that out.
David and Bathsheba, that was an opportunity that he took to do something bad, and he got kicked real hard for it later on. But then so David does do some stupid things, but we can also use the opportunities.
That opportunity turned into Solomon, which turned out to be, pretty wise guy.
Well, Doeg's opportunistic choice was to put the priests of God to death because they weren't loyal to the king. Well, the priest's job is not to be loyal to the king.
No kidding.
It's to be loyal to God.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where his error, one of his errors anyway.
And it set the stage for Abiathar to become the high priest, which he probably maybe had not been on that path before. And he ended up being a good example, he and David and Solomon ultimately they ended up working together pretty well.
Percy, going back to what you said about the priests were not loyal to Saul, but to God. In the sermon this morning, being holy, I mean, our loyalty should be to God and not to people, to be set apart.
Well, I was also thinking if Doeg had actually thought of the bigger picture rather than himself, I wonder if he would have redeemed his family name, and that would have been the story of look at this hero Doeg rather than look at this horrible man who was opportunistic and so.
I shouldn't have used these examples of redheaded stepchild.
My dad's a redheaded stepchild. He uses that all the time. It's like, do you want me to backhand you like a redheaded stepchild?
So she just got up and let me say that.
No, she had to go downstairs.
All right. Y'all have a good week. Let's end into the prayer real quick and, I don't know, are we close? Yeah, okay.
Hey, can you throw in there, obviously, I didn't think about this earlier, but Becca just had surgery, her third knee surgery on Wednesday. So she apparently is, not that, I mean, the third time around, she kind of get a little, it gets easier each time, but she said that she was taking a shower and she got a little sick, had to sit down a few times in the shower, so it's a little rougher this time around, so we could just pray for Becca.
Okay. All right, let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the lesson that you put before us today, and Lord, we're thankful for everybody here and the conversation we had with each other. Lord, let us be the good kind of opportunist that looks to do things for the good, and let us please help us all resist the opportunity to take the cheap, easy shot that's always feels good at the time, but it's never a good long-term decision. Lord, we ask that you be with Rebecca and her recovery with her knees, and be with that and just help her. And I know she's so young to have so many, at this point already had so many surgeries and on her knees. I know that's something that will end up bothering her for a long time. Help her not be too discouraged with that, and let her recover well and go from there. Lord, we just I didn't think of it earlier, but I want to mention now there's two different folks I'm aware of up in Detroit. Need prayers, be with the Lowry family and the loss of their son Alexander, and the car wreck, and help him and watch over Enoch and his family as they deal with that sudden loss and all of their family. Lord, be with Mary Lucy and her recent diagnosis with pancreatic cancer, and be with her family that's helping her. And she's not in her home right now, and then dealing with the surgery all at the same time. And Lord, just help her be with her, and help me do the right things to help relate to that also. Lord, we thank you just so much for your son Jesus, and the fact that he came and left a really good life with you, and came down here to be treated the way he did, just so that he could be that ultimate sacrifice that he chose to be for us. Lord, we're so thankful for that. Help us remember to live our lives in a thankful way. Lord, we thank you for Jesus. We pray in his name.